Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Elena Pinto, and a reminder to download the PCMTV app so you can have access to the history of the fight to end cannabis prohibition with the best of Weed Talk news over the past 3 years. Now that we are Cannabis Coast to Coast News, we continue our state-by-state election results, and we start in Virginia, a traditional red state that turned blue in this election. Here's Joe Parsons.
I'm Joe Parsons from the Virginia Cannabis Connection, and this is the Virginia Cannabis Report on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Well, Election Day is finally here, and I'm standing out in my hometown. That's right, I am in Appomattox, Virginia. A lot of people might not know this, but Appomattox is where our modern freedom began. That's right, only 2 miles from where I stand right now was the actual end of the Civil War. So when you think of freedom, you think of the town of Appomattox. Now I'm going to give you a little recap of how the election turned out here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
The Virginia election results are as followed. For the presidency, Kamala Harris took it here in Virginia with 51.8% versus Donald Trump's 46.6%. We were the only state below the Mason-Dixon line to actually remain blue, with counties like Albemarle, Richmond, and Northern Virginia to see us through. As far as the 2024 Virginia Senate race, it was Timothy Kaine versus Hung Cao. Timothy Kaine, the Democrat, has always been a champion for cannabis reform, and we hope that his continued success will allow an adult use program to launch soon. As far as the Senate, we managed to maintain Democratic control with a score of 6-5.
Well, that's going to do it from the Virginia Cannabis Connection. Once again, I am Joe Parsons. I just want to say one last thing before I go. Pro-Cannabis Media and myself would like to thank everyone that took the time to come out and vote for this monumental and historic election. Cannabis was on the table no matter which side wins. So, for all of you that took the time and made your voice heard, we thank you so much. And if your party didn't win, then all you got to do is keep fighting for democracy, keep fighting for peace, and until next time, stay lifted.
With all the doom and gloom of an election day that did not bring the success the cannabis industry was hoping for, there was a different story in Kentucky. The Bluegrass State asked 106 cities and counties to vote on whether they would ban medical cannabis in their areas. Not only did that pass, but all 106 cities and counties in that state approved the program rollout in their jurisdictions unanimously. That state also announced when they will start to give out licenses to operate medical dispensaries and how that lottery will work. Over the weekend, former President Trump completed his sweep in all 7 battleground states when it was announced he had carried Arizona. As Karen Black explains, at the time of her report was still up in the air, as are other state races. But here's her Arizona cannabis report now.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. While there weren't any cannabis-related issues on the Arizona ballot November 5th, the state has certainly been in the national news and not in a good way. Arizona was one of 7 battleground states in this year's presidential election, and as of my report, still has not officially declared a winner for the country's highest office or other races, and it will likely be another week until all ballots are counted. At stake is a highly contested U.S. Senate race, which could affect the balance of power of that body. Democrat Ruben Gallego, the ex-husband of Phoenix Mayor Kate Gallego, is ahead, but is losing ground to Republican Carrie Lake, a former local TV news anchor who lost the 2022 governor's race to Democrat Katie Hobbs. All this drama is unfolding against a backdrop of court cases and recent rulings regarding the 2020, 22, and even 2024 elections. It's a real mess over here, so don't hold your breath. Unless, of course, you're consuming. On a lighter note, cannabis just got more convenient in the Grand Canyon state. Adult use delivery service began November 1st, 2 months ahead of the January 2025 deadline. Now, just like ordering a pizza, you can have your bud brought to you by a dispensary or contracted third party. While delivery is certainly a benefit for recreational cannabis consumers, It may deal the death blow to Arizona's already beleaguered medical cannabis program. That's all for the Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There is a new lawsuit being filed against the DEA over their latest hearing procedures or rescheduling cannabis to Schedule 3. David Hildreth, the CEO of Panacea Plant Services, says that the DEA's procedures of soliciting testimony for that hearing on December 2nd was unlawful on many fronts. He asked for a stay on any further hearings and testimony. This is the supposedly last hearing before the DEA rules on moving cannabis to Schedule 3 of the Controlled Substances Act. And now that hearing is still scheduled for December 2nd. They've just postponed testimony as a delaying tactic. So while the hearing is about the Controlled Substances Act, it seems like the DEA is more about controlling the process than the substance itself. Jason Greninger is a research scientist out of Las Vegas who has paired cannabis treatments for specific strains of the plant.
Scheduling means control. It's the Controlled Substances Act, the CSA, and that means control. That's the first word. And people need to understand that's what's happening. It's a mission of control. It was out of their control when they said it had no value whatsoever. And we knew it did, and the states got to get around that and got around what they called Schedule 1 somehow by making the rules and legislation that they have in place. But they are trying now to put it in a box for Schedule 3, which is a different level of control. And there's nothing outside of that box that exists that allows you to not be a criminal if you're not getting it through your provider and through your insurance, or at least through your provider and access through that system. Okay, so they're about to take it all away, in my opinion. But there's no framework that exists to do what they say and we think can actually happen. Their Schedule 3 means controlled, and that means provided by a provider and managed by pharma.
There is a movement to deschedule, not reschedule, the plant after 70% of the public comments the DEA solicited months ago reflected that statement. Needless to say, no matter what the result was going to be on Tuesday of last week, you knew the stock market would be impacted. Cannabis stocks took a real hit again, and that volatility is not going to stop anytime soon. Doug Miller is our man who is high on Wall Street. Here's what happened to some of the publicly traded cannabis stocks.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's cannabis stock report for Cannabis Coast to Coast. Cannabis stocks tanked after Election Day results after failing to pass legalization in Florida, North Dakota, and South Dakota, and the possibility of marijuana reform under Trump's presidency. The American Cannabis Operator Index, which includes 9 U.S. publicly traded cannabis companies, was down nearly 27%. MSOS Pure U.S. Cannabis ETF was down to $4.89, and entering the basement as it dips. YOLO, another cannabis ETF, was down to $2.79, and that's down at the bottom. And Canopy Growth had earnings, and their stock dipped, and it's pulling back. So we have to watch for the bottom and wait for these bad boys to want to bounce back, and I'll keep you posted about that. So that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast, I'm Doug Miller.
With 24 states in the U.S. already in the adult use of cannabis sales market and now 39 implementing or continuing their medicinal cannabis programs, it should come as no surprise that more Americans are using the plant medicine than ever before. A recent Gallup poll released this past week concludes that the total of use of cannabis by adults is now at 15%, which is 1% more than last year. But since 2013, that usage figure has increased by 8%. As for adults who admit they have at least tried cannabis, that figure was just 4% in 1969. That experimental trend continued until 1985, when it was 35%. And now 47% of adults admit they have at least tried weed in some capacity. One state that continues to see their cannabis market thrive is Michigan. Amy Carter tells us that there are still some political races that have yet to be called. Here's Amy.
I am Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I have the latest updates on cannabis legislation from across Michigan following Election Day. On November 5th, several proposals regarding marijuana businesses were put to the voters, with mixed results across various counties. In Barron County, Niles Township saw a significant shift as a proposal to lift a ban on marijuana businesses passed with 52% of the vote, allowing for a minimum of 4 retail locations, 1 secure transporter, and 1 safety compliance lab. Meanwhile, Royalton Township bid to permit 3 growers and processor licenses failed with only 44% in support. Moving to Gladwin County, Tobacco Township approved a proposal to allow marijuana businesses with a very narrow margin, a difference of only 15 votes. However, in Ingham County, Mason, a charter amendment for 2 retailers was rejected, receiving just 43% of the vote. Howell in Livingston County saw a proposal for 2 retailers fail with 48% in favor. In Monroe County, Bedford Township attempted to repeal a ban on marijuana businesses that fell flat with only 36% approval. Erie Township also saw a proposal to allow retail with only 40% support. In Oakland County, Clawson made headlines with a successful proposal to allow 2 marijuana retailers, passing with 54% of the vote. However, Lathrop Village had 2 proposals fall with results in the low 40s. Interestingly, Royal Oak Township saw a proposal to ban marijuana businesses fail, while Washtenaw County, their request for licenses to grow and process also did not pass, with just 38% support. As the landscape of cannabis legislation continues to evolve, these results reflect on the ongoing debate and varied opinions surrounding marijuana businesses in Michigan. That's it for this week. I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
A very interesting research report by the University of Buffalo thinks the failed war on drugs that preached just say no should be changed to just say educate. After all, with more people using cannabis for medicinal purposes and the advent of more legal adult use of the product, the focus for public health should be education and not punishment. A paper published in the American Journal of Public Health by Dr. Daniel Kruger believes that as society starts to accept that cannabis legalization is inevitable at some point, the public needs to know about how to use the product safely. Kruger concluded that we should move toward harm reduction and health promotion using already existing tools with which public health practitioners are familiar with. He also recognized the complexities of this plant with over 150 cannabinoids being discovered over the past decade or so. He thinks medical researchers and consumers should move away from a focus on THC, the intoxicating cannabinoid, to some of the newly discovered minor cannabinoids. So now let's check in on the tribal nations and the political balance in Nevada, where Tina Tasaka reports from this week.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Voters in Nevada cast ballots in the state's 4 congressional districts for House seats, and here are the final results. All 4 winners were incumbents. Mark Amade, Republican, fully supports the Safe Banking Act. Dina Titus, Democrat, has fully supported dispensaries and the Safe Banking Act. Stephen Horsford, Democrat, has commented on efforts to move cannabis to Schedule III. Susie Lee, Democrat. And Jackie Rosen, Nevada Senator. Jackie narrowly defended her Senate seat. She has been a strong advocate for cannabis reform in Congress. In the past, she has proposed the legislation that is endorsed by NORML, Americans for Prosperity, and the Last Prisoner Project. With Florida rejecting Amendment 3 in legalizing adult cannabis use for the state, did this have an impact to Nevada's Planet 13? Planet 13 remains committed to expanding within the state and recently posted a Q3 net loss of $7.4 million, a marked improvement from last year's $46.3 million loss, while revenue rose 30% to $32.2 million, driven by its Florida market entry. Co-CEO Larry Scheffler emphasized plans for growth through expanded stores and distribution of HaHa edibles. By September 30th, the company held $243 million in assets and $27.4 million in cash, with liabilities of $92.3 million. In tribal news, on Election Day 2024, 178 Native candidates appeared on ballots across 24 states out of an initial 250 candidates at the start of the season. This marks a 44% increase in Native representation since the 2022 midterms, according to Advanced Native Political Leadership. Of these candidates, 95 are Democrats, 21 Republicans, 3 independents, and 59 represent WION. In the U.S. House, 9 indigenous candidates, including several incumbents, and here are the highlights. Incumbent Republican Josh Breachin, Choctaw Nation, representing Oklahoma, 2nd District. Incumbent Tom Cole, Chickasaw Nation, representing Oklahoma, 4th District. Cole was elected to Congress in 2002 and is serving his 10th term. He is the longest serving Native American lawmaker in House history. Incumbent Sharice Davids, Ho-Chunk Nation, Kansas, 3rd District. That's it for the Nevada highlights and tribal nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the B block of this week. Cannabis Coast to Coast News is coming up with the final section, and we have the story of the new executive director of Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission and an annual growing cup competition called the Harvest Cup that drew thousands of people to the DCU Center in Worcester, Massachusetts, to compete for the best strains, edibles, concentrates, pre-rolls, and a few other categories. Stay with us.
It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Now, let me tell you my cannabis story. You know, I've had 4 major surgeries in the past 23 years and suffer from osteoarthritis with a variety of metal parts in my body and one on deck. Now, thanks to those chronic pain issues, I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore. So I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weegits filtration system. What? The Weegits.com, Weegits, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product that cools the smoke from everyone's favorite flower. The guy that started this was a pretty good medical device manufacturer, and he created this maze pipe that cools the smoking process from 1300 degrees Fahrenheit upon inflammation down to just 90 degrees when it reaches your mouth. That's right, 1300 down to 90. That's why this maze pipe is amazing. Now, add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weegits.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind.